just over 50% of people have actively considered taking their own life as a direct consequence of this addiction. This is a serious problem, a very serious problem that can have devastating impact on people's lives.
My name's Ian Henderson, and I'm the founder of the Naked Truth Project. What happens when you bring 6 leading voices together to talk about pornography? In the P-Word Talks, I travel across the country to have honest, eye-opening conversations with experts including Dr. Paula Hall, Helen Taylor, Dr. Alex Bailey, Dr. Ellie Hansen, Lord James Bethel, and Dame Rachel D'Souza. They come from different backgrounds: mental health, safeguarding, politics, and public advocacy. And they don't always agree with each other, or with us at Naked Truth on every point. But they do agree on this: porn is causing real harm, and it's time we talked about it. Paula, thank you so much for having this conversation. I think we've known each other for at least a decade.
Oh yeah, at least.
Yeah, and I'm not sure I've ever asked you this question before. So you are a psychotherapist, leading expert in porn and sex addiction. How did you even get into that work? Because people always ask me why I do what I do, so it's nice to turn the tables.
So I trained as a psychotherapist 32 years ago. I started training after I had my children. So it was a second career. I was in marketing before. So it was a second career. And I trained with Relate and became a psychosexual therapist as well as a couple therapist. And about 18 years ago, I was working in private practice, and I started seeing people coming to see me with compulsive sexual behaviours. We certainly wouldn't have called it sex addiction, or probably even that back then. And frankly, didn't really know what I was doing, didn't know how to work with it, didn't really understand it. Usual tools weren't working. And then I went to a conference, and a speaker spoke about this thing called sex addiction. And he had just come back from a conference in the US with Patrick Carnes, who's widely considered the kind of godfather of sex addiction. And it just made sense. It just absolutely made sense to me. So I started working in it, and I've always had a heart for the underdog. I've always had a heart for the people that are misunderstood. And what I noticed very quickly was that the shame and the secrecy around this condition was huge, bigger than anything else I'd ever worked with. And that made me want to work in it. So I started writing the book, got the T-shirt, so on and so forth, and here I am.
You are. So tell us a little bit about what your work looks like and what you do.
So what does my work look like? So I run 3 companies now. There's the Laurel Centre, which is probably best known. The Laurel Centre, we're a team of 25 therapists all around the UK, and we've also got a kind of subsidiaries that also deliver our programme in the Netherlands and also now in Singapore, most recently. And we provide individual counselling and therapy. We run groups as well, recovery groups and support for partners, and couple counselling and psychosexual therapy. So that's the Laurel Centre. Also ISTAT training. So that's the Institute of Sex Addiction Training. So we're a training organisation, and we do kind of in-house training for a number of different people, but we also have an accredited diploma. So that is specifically aimed at therapists, counsellors and psychotherapists who want to specialise and train in this field. And most recently, Pivotal Recovery. So Pivotal Recovery is a not-for-profit CIC, community interest company, providing affordable, low-cost, anonymous self-help resources.
Amazing. It's been, as I say, over a decade, 13, 14 years you've been in this work. So have you seen changes in the perceptions that there are around sex and porn addiction? I guess it was pretty taboo when you started, maybe. And
yeah, absolutely. So when I started working in this all that time ago, Michael Douglas, a Hollywood star that some people may not, he had recently been found out, come out as being a sex addict, and that's probably he was one of the first people that kind of popularised it. And I think back then, sex addiction, and everybody called it sex addiction back then. We didn't have porn addiction because we didn't have smartphones. That's how long I've been in this business. So sex addiction was kind of something that the rich and the famous struggled with, because primarily it was about paying for sex. It was about excess and paying for sex. So it was the privilege, if you like, of the wealthy, really. Now, I mean, the smartphone has changed everything. The accessibility to sexual services has never been greater than it is now. So the profile of your typical person struggling with this is very, very different to what it was back then. And I think also back then it was just seen as a bit of a kind of silly, a sensational thing, a dramatic thing. Now, generally, as a society, I think we're taking it much more seriously. I still think there's quite an age difference there. I think if you go to a group of university students, you're not going to find anybody questioning whether porn addiction exists. They may not agree with the label addiction, which you'll probably ask me about. They may not agree with the terminology, but is it possible to have problems with porn? Hell yeah. I think no one's going to doubt it.
Yeah.
There are still some older people who don't quite get it and don't quite get how serious this is.
Is that because when you say the word pornography, they still think of analogue and they still think of magazines and whatever?
Absolutely. They're thinking topless, they're thinking page 3, they're thinking, that kind of stuff. They have got no idea. I read something on social media fairly recently, and somebody was trying to make a point that they'd been working in this for 10 years. That in 2015 we didn't have all this scaremongering around pornography. Why do we have it now? What's changed? And they were, and I just thought, boy, you have not looked at porn recently.
Yeah.
The genres of pornography are not what they were 10 years ago. They have changed dramatically. Algorithms. I don't even know if I knew the word algorithm 10 years ago. I certainly didn't know what it was in terms of social media. Has changed considerably.
Yeah. What do you think are the biggest misconceptions that the general public might still have about porn addiction then? There's been this shift, this change in understanding, but are there any things that remain as misconceptions?
One would be that it's extremely rare. Not that many people probably struggle from it, and it's perhaps a certain type of person, probably somebody single, lonely, maybe not terribly intelligent or something. A certain type might, and that's not the case at all. The other would be that it's dangerous. A misconception, the idea that actually, and somebody said this to me just the other day, oh, you work in porn addictions, and then started asking me about the risks they pose to children. And that assumption that porn addiction, porn offending, porn addiction, sex offending, that they go hand in hand.
Yeah.
And I think there is often a lot of scaremongering around it, that people with porn addiction are really, really dangerous. So that'd be kind of a second category. So one would be that it's very, very rare and a certain sort of lonely type. The other would be that it's a dangerous type. The final one would be that it's not that serious. Yeah, maybe people do struggle with it. They just need to get a grip. It's all a bit silly and made up. Some of the research that we've done for Pivotal recently showed that I think it was just over 50% of people have actively considered taking their own life as a direct consequence of this addiction. This is a serious problem, a very serious problem that can have devastating impact on people's lives.
Yeah. I've noticed that professionals in different fields, research and other areas as well, seem to be leaning away from or don't even agree with the term porn addiction. Why is that?
Because it doesn't exist,
Okay.
to be blunt. So where we're at the moment, the date that we are filming this, so whenever this is viewed in the future, it may have changed by then, because the research is changing rapidly. So I am speaking as of now. It is not an addiction. So technically it's not an addiction. We haven't got sufficient research yet to demonstrate that it meets all the criteria of a behavioural addiction. So the behavioural addictions that currently have been accepted both by ICD and DSM, so those are kind of the Bibles, if you like, of mental health issues. The two that have been accepted are gambling and gaming. So behavioural addiction is certainly recognised and it's researched. What we don't know yet is whether or not pornography use or other types of sexual behaviours, whether that's visiting sex workers, using adult apps or whatever it might be, whether or not that meets the same criteria for addiction. And basically the research, we're waiting for that research to happen. In particular, the piece of research that's missing is whether or not there's escalation. Whether or not people build a tolerance to their behaviour and need more and more and more of it in order to get the same hit. Do they spend more and more time? Do they look at more and more extreme stuff, more extreme material to get the same hit? Many of us that work in the field know that anecdotally, that is what we see. Certainly, for me as a clinician, that's what I see. But we haven't got the research yet. And that is the piece that will be fundamental to moving it from a impulse control disorder, which is where it's currently situated, to an addictive disorder. What I would say also, though, is, as a clinician, it doesn't really matter. What matters is, and we do know this, that it is a problem that significantly impacts people's lives, and many, many people want help and can't find it. And that is what matters. So for me, I don't care whether addiction is the right terminology or not. I'll use that language because my clients do. The majority of people seeking help do. But technically, it's not correct.
To your clients, it feels like addiction, whether it's clinically diagnosable as that or not. That's their experience of it, as they would understand what addiction should feel like or would feel like. Absolutely.
Yeah. Continuing to do something you really do not want to do, you don't even particularly enjoy anymore, and it's causing loads of problems in your life, but you still find yourself craving and doing it anyway. Yeah. That's kind of how we describe addiction, and that's how most people would describe the problem they're experiencing with pornography.
And so there are some other terms that get used, like problematic porn use and compulsive sexual behaviour disorder. Do you have a preferred term yourself, or?
So CSBD, compulsive sexual behaviour disorder, is the correct term at the moment, according to ICD. So if I am speaking to academics, I will use the term CSBD. But there is nobody, as far as I know, Google's help for CSBD.
Sure. Yeah.
CSBD therapy, nobody's looking for that. So in communications with clients, when I'm client facing, then I'm using the language of addiction. Problematic pornography use, PPU, is used as widely used in academia as well as a subset of CSBD. So compulsive sexual behaviour disorder would include all of the behaviours. PPU are the ones that are very specific to pornography use. So CSBD, PPU, I use that with my academic hat on. Client facing, addiction.
Yeah. And is there a sort of spectrum that the terminology acknowledges? Like, is there kind of habitual use, then problematic use, and then compulsive use? Does it work like that?
Yeah, absolutely. More and more research showing that across all the behavioural addictions. So this is kind of quite widely accepted now in, for example, gambling and gaming disorder. It's recognised that it starts as recreational use, it becomes increasingly problematic, and then it kind of morphs into an addiction somewhere on this spectrum. And we're now seeing that research coming out with pornography use as well, very specifically. And what the research is showing us is that there are changes in terms of brain responses, in terms of the way people think, so the cognitions around it, and the way that people feel and react and respond to triggers. And though they vary considerably from the recreational use through to the addictive use. So yeah, it's very much a spectrum. So and I think it's important to recognise it's not binary. Am I an addict or am I not an addict? Is this habitual or recreational problem? Or where you're somewhere on a spectrum. We're all somewhere on that spectrum.
Yeah, and I know there will be people who would say it's absolutely not an addiction and can never be an addiction. They would maybe argue that this is maybe something that's in conflict with an individual's moral or value base, and that's actually what they're dealing with. They're dealing with that kind of dissonance and that conflict, and there's no scientific kind of evidence around it being anything more than that kind of moral quandary. Yeah. We would certainly acknowledge, yes, there may well be a moral quandary that happens for an individual. What would your response be to someone who says, oh, this is just somebody struggling with an internal battle rather than something happening as a sort of
so there has been quite a lot of research done on that as well, looking at moral incongruence is the term. So you get moral incongruence in all addictions, moral incongruence. So people, for example, who believe they should be teetotal, it may be part of their faith system, or it may just be a moral issue with alcohol. They believe they should be completely teetotal, but they have one glass of wine on a Friday night, every Friday night. That does not make them an alcoholic. Now, that may give them a problem, and they may have issues with that, and they may seek help for that, and that's fine, that's okay, but that does not mean they have an addiction. And we see a very similar kind of thing happening with pornography. In fact, we see many more people with pornography issues where it's actually to do with moral incongruence rather than with any actual dysregulation. So what the research has shown in a nutshell is, of all the people that seek help, approximately 30% will genuinely have problematic pornography use. 30% it will be moral incongruence. I feel this is morally wrong, and I definitely have dysregulated use. And 30% it is purely moral incongruence. I feel I'm doing a bad thing and I still do it anyway. So for those people, as I say, they're reaching out for help, looking for support, and that's important that we give that, but it is not going to be the same kind of help as you give for somebody where their use is very obviously addictive, compulsive, or whatever language you want to use.
So could you, in sort of layman's terms for a non-scientist like me, explain a little bit about the neuroscience then? What's happening biologically in the brain when people are consuming porn or engaging in their compulsion?
Yeah. Pornography is arousing. Don't need to point that out, pretty obvious. So when we look at pornography, when we look at anything stimulating, we get a hit of dopamine in the brain. So dopamine is a really, really important neurochemical that helps us to seek out rewards. If we don't have dopamine, we suffer from depression. If we don't have dopamine, we'd never want to have sex, and that would not be a good thing for the human race. And we also wouldn't want to eat. So it's kind of part of what gives us appetite as well. So dopamine is a really important chemical. But what we know with pornography is that it's what's often referred to as a supernormal stimuli. So it gives us tons of dopamine. So we get ultimate variety, ultimate novelty with pornography, which means that your dopamine levels just keep on spiking. Yeah, which is why people can spend hours and hours and hours looking at porn. And it's an important distinction. People that will look at pornography purely for sexual satisfaction probably don't look at it for more than 20 minutes, half an hour.
Sure.
Job done without wanting to be too overt. But where it is compulsive use, they just continue looking over for hours and hours and hours at end, because what they want is to continue that dopamine high because it feels good in their brain. The other thing we know, as we were talking about earlier in terms of the difference between kind of recreational use, problematic use and addictive use, is that the more that we, if you like, exercise those neural pathways to do with dopamine, the reward centre of the brain, the stronger they become, the more of it we start needing. It becomes a stronger and stronger pathway. And the decision-making pathway begins to reduce. So our ability in the early stages, we go, you know what, look at the time, that's enough, I've got work tomorrow, clock off, that's recreational use. But the more that addictive behaviours take a hold, the harder it is to actually hear that other voice, for that other neural pathway in the brain to actually get acknowledged. So the decision making becomes weaker and weaker, but the desire becomes stronger and stronger.
I've got a couple of follow-up questions there. One, though, you talking about the decision-making part of the brain. I guess I would have read around teenage brains and obviously not being fully developed. And one of the bits that's not fully developed yet is that prefrontal cortex, which is that decision-making part. So are they even more risk in the sense of that's a less developed part of the brain for that decision-making to be not happening?
Absolutely. And again, this is where we have the kind of challenge around the name of whether it's addiction or not. We know from years and years of research that if young people are exposed to alcohol, for example, in adolescence, they have a significantly higher chance of developing alcoholism in later life. We know that. We haven't yet got the evidence that also happens with pornography, but for many people it feels like common sense, and that's probably what is happening. If you expose people to very, very strong stimuli in the early stages when the brain is developing, they're more likely to develop problems with it later. So yeah, absolutely, there's it makes sense that there's a greater risk for adolescents. The research hasn't been done. However, there's a real ethical problem with doing that. So I suspect we will never really get the research. Certainly, I know from the clients I work with, the vast majority have been exposed, many accidentally, to pornography from a very young age. It's actually quite hard to find a group of people, particularly nowadays, who haven't watched pornography from a very early age. So it's getting harder and harder to research that. Plus, researching the impact of pornography on youth particularly, ethically, would be a nightmare. It would be completely unethical. So, let's just say, right, we're going to take 50 12-year-olds and we're going to expose them to hardcore porn, and we're going to get 50 12-year-olds and take away any digital device from them whatsoever, and we're going to see what happens in 10 years' time.
Yeah.
I can't see any ethics boards agreeing to that research.
I wonder if there will be, and I was going to ask about this just because as you were talking about neuroscience, obviously some people would have heard of language like dopamine and that will be familiar to them, but perhaps not in relation to pornography, maybe in relation to devices. And it feels like that's been a current conversation of, you get a dopamine hit when you're scrolling anything, let alone porn. And I wonder if there's, any comparisons that can be made, or is this more problematic now because not only is porn more available and all those things that have come with smartphone technology, there's something about the phone too that is making it more
ultimately
powerful.
The phone is just it's a different device, a different medium for delivering a drug. So we know from drug research, though, that, for example, heroin, when people started injecting it, it became more problematic. The different ways that you actually access a drug is going to make a difference to the impact. A distinction here, which may sound like it's just being pedantic, but I think it is important. Nobody really gets addicted to the internet. The internet in itself is not something that can be addicted. You can't actually get addicted to a smartphone. You get addicted to things that are on it.
Yes.
So we didn't really have the problem with gambling that we have now until we could access gambling sites on the phone. Getting messages from we all would have loved to have got a lovely letter. Do you remember letters? It came in an envelope.
Yeah,
This is lovely. Oh, Auntie Pat's doing really well. Whatever it is, it would be really lovely. But chances are we wouldn't get them falling into our inbox, goodness knows how many times a day. Validation and affirmation, someone saying, hey, I think you're a great guy. We all would have got that. But you can get like. It's a different method of administering something that spikes dopamine.
Yeah.
Can't remember if that was the question.
Well, I guess my question was more leading to we might not want to do research around, your teenagers and porn use, but would there be anything gained from research being done with teenagers and their phones, which might be less problematic ethically?
I think it's much more complex than that. The problem is, and this does link with, it does link with addiction. The smartphone, the delivery system, is one element that has made pornography much more problematic than it was in the past. But it doesn't happen just in a vacuum. So even if you did give hardcore porn to 50 teenagers, whatever, on a smartphone, there will be many that have other what we call protective factors. So that might be seen as a risk factor. Here's hardcore porn, here's a mobile device. That is going to be a significant risk factor. So our risk factors have gone up in society since the smartphone. But we have protective factors, and the protective factors are things like education. The protective factors are, it's sunny outside and my mates are playing, and actually, I'm going to go out. The protective factors are feeling loved, feeling cared for, feeling ambitious about the work that you want to do, feeling engaged with life. There are many other things that are protective factors. So some young people are much more vulnerable than others. If they also have hardcore porn on a smartphone, that makes them even more vulnerable. But it's not simply we would need to take into account all of those other protective factors and risk factors as well.
So I think that leads me to a question about demographics then. Is there a typical demographic of addict? We're going to use the addiction language for the sake of the conversation. Is that class? Is that gender? Is that age? Or is it just?
It's an equal opportunity.
Yeah, okay.
It is an equal opportunity addiction.
Yeah.
The only distinction I would say is probably to do with gender. We certainly see considerably more men struggling with this than women, for sure. I think it's often easier for men to come forward for help. Yes. There are many, many more services for men than for women. When we developed Pivotal Recovery, tried really, really hard to ensure that it was open to people of any gender, any sexual orientation as well, any age over 18. But the majority of users, and I think we've been pretty successful at that, but the majority of users are still male. I think with the research that we've done, it's like 98% are male and about 75% are heterosexual. Apart from that, certainly at the Laurel Centre, we certainly see more and more young men coming forward for help, but I think that is probably more to do with changes in social discourse around men's mental health. So I think younger men in particular are much more in touch with their mental health and much more willing to come forward for help and begin to talk about problems with their mental health than may have been happening a generation before.
Some interviews that you've done and things you've written, you emphasise that addiction often serves as a way of maybe coping with pain, emotional pain. How have you therefore used therapy as a way of uncovering some of those underlying wounds? And are there any common wounds that come back time and time again with different clients?
So, yeah, absolutely. The majority of people that develop addictive problems or compulsive problems, it's a symptom of something else. It's a symptom of emotional dysregulation. So really struggling to manage uncomfortable emotions, whether that's stress, anxiety, depression, loneliness, low self-esteem, anger management. Pornography is a very effective anger management tool. Many people may find themselves beginning to get into problematic use, those early stages, without having any awareness of these underlying issues. But if you're kind of unlucky enough, as it's kind of taking hold in the brain, as it were, that we were talking about earlier, to also, fail your exams or get made redundant or not get the promotion you hoped, partner leaves you for somebody else, you get betrayed, you get whatever it might be, then you may be more likely to then use your pornography as a way of coping and managing with those difficult emotions. For some people, those issues will go back into childhood. So we see a lot of people who have had problems in their family of origin, sort of difficulties with parenting, feeling close to their parents. We see a lot of adult survivors of sexual abuse, particularly. A lot of, because it's predominantly men, a lot of male survivors of sexual abuse. And I do think that is an area that is still very difficult for a lot of men to talk about. So in terms of, is there anything that's more common than anything else? Probably not. It'll be some kind of trauma, some kind of attachment wound, as we call it in psychotherapy, but I'm not sure there's anything that's more common than anything else.
So you, in your work, you've kind of talked about the choice model as a framework that you use in helping people recover. And tell us a little bit about that and what some of the steps of that model are.
So the choice recovery model, the choice, CHOICE, so it's an acrostic that stands for 6 steps of recovery. But it's also very much kind of the philosophy of the approach that we take at the Laurel Centre in Pivotal. Ultimately, we are responsible for our own behaviours. We choose how we behave. We choose whether we look at porn. We choose what kind of sex life we want to have.
Even if you're an addict.
Even if you're an addict. Also, we don't choose not to... You can't choose not to crave. Nobody would choose to crave, but you can choose whether or not you actually act out, to use that language. But it feels as though that choice is taken away. So I think all of us should be able to be masters of our own universe. We ought to be able to choose the kind of life that we want to have. And the more that addiction takes hold, the harder it is to make that choice. So we never completely lose the choice, but it gets much, much harder to make that choice the more that addiction takes hold. So recovery is about being able to make your own choices again. It's about getting into the driving seat of your own life again. And being able to go, no, this addiction, this compulsion is not making the decisions for me anymore. I am. I choose how I want to live. And it's also the acrostics for the 6 steps. So the first step, the first C, is about challenging faulty core beliefs. And that's really important. Many, many people will have tripped up on many different occasions. They will find themselves continually relapsing. They will have tried 10 times, 100 times, 1,000 times to get into recovery and failed. And really being able to take time to think about, what is it that keeps tripping me up? What is the message that I have about myself that stops me? Am I telling myself, but I'm different, I'm not the same as other people? Am I telling myself that I'm too weak, I'm just too incompetent, I never stick at anything? What are the negative judgments that you have about yourself that can sabotage your recovery? You need to sort those out first. The H is about having a vision. Who's the person I want to be? What's the life I want to lead? It's much easier to motivate ourselves towards something positive than away from something negative. And we all know that. It's much easier to say, I want to get down to 10 stone than I want to lose 2 stone. You frame it as a positive. The O is about overcoming the actual behaviours, and that's all about recognising the cycle of addiction, recognising your triggers, developing relapse prevention strategies. And I think, again, one of the mistakes people often make is thinking that recovery is just about relapse prevention strategies.
Yeah.
All I need is the relapse prevention strategies. It's about more than that. You need to go much further back than that. If it was that simple, we could just print out a little list. Here you go. Here's the things to do, and you won't do it. It's much harder. But it is one of the steps. The I is about identify positive sexuality. Because the great news is that stopping sex and porn addiction isn't about giving up sex. We are all sexual human beings, and we should feel good about our sexuality. We should feel comfortable with it. We should feel confident about it. It should be something that makes us feel good about ourselves, something to be celebrated. So really identifying what positive sexuality means for you, for your life stage, for your value system, wherever it fits for you, is really important. Again, it's part of that heading towards what I want to have. What do I choose to have? The next C is about connecting with other people. And that's why we do a lot of group work, because isolation, we know, is something that really fuels addiction. And the final E is about establishing confident recovery. And that really is the piece where, okay, I know this has been about anger management. I need to find healthy ways to manage my anger from now on. Okay, I recognise that this is to do with some of the stuff that happened in my past, some of the painful stuff. I'm going to go for therapy and I'm going to address that. So that's kind of the real long-term piece.
And that's, you would say that particularly that last one is maybe the difference between someone just, staying sober, not using porn anymore, and being someone who's recovered or free from porn. It's not just that I've found ways of kind of boxing myself in. I'm actually now living a different life,
a recovered life.
Yeah.
There's another misunderstanding actually. There's such a huge difference between sobriety, abstinence, and recovery. I don't believe in the once an addict, always an addict, which you might hear bandied around, and that's some of the reasons some people are against the addiction label, because they see it as being so negative. I think often actually people that think that don't really understand addiction. So many of the people against the term addiction don't actually understand very much about addiction. It's their misunderstanding they've got a problem with. So don't believe in once an addict, always an addict. And many people don't now. Don't believe in the disease model of addiction. Many people don't. You may always have a bit of a susceptibility that you need to be aware of, but it is something you can actually move on from completely. Research that's been done in chemical addictions is that if you haven't acted out for 5 years, you've got about as much chance of going back to it as somebody who's never had the problem in the first place. So recovery, complete recovery, is building a life where this has no place anymore. If you talk to someone in recovery from alcohol who hasn't had a drink for 10 years, they don't think about it every day. They're not fighting cravings. They're not worried about relapse. They've probably made a decision never to drink again, but they're so busy cracking on with their life they don't even think about it anymore. And that is what recovery is, building a life where you don't even really think about porn anymore. It's just not something you do. It's just not my thing. Just not into it anymore. That's what recovery is.
And so you talked about the disease model. Just explain what that idea is.
So originally, many years ago, long before we had much neuroscience and we understood about this stuff, but we used to think that some substances were so powerful in themselves that they could override the survival response. Okay, and they did this experiment with rats. Very mean. And basically, a rat would consume cocaine, consume heroin to the point of death. Boomf, that was it. That's where the disease model came from. This stuff is so flipping powerful, it overrides the survival response. They've repeated that experiment but done it differently on a number of occasions, and it's referred to as the rat park experiment. And this is being a bit simplistic, it's a bit more complex than this. But basically what they did was they had a community of rats, lots and lots of rats and lots of rat toys and things that rats do and enjoy. And they discovered that most of the rats had no interest in the heroin whatsoever, and no rat died in the experiment. The problem was the cage, and the problem was the isolation, not the drug. So nowadays, most people will go with what's known as a biopsychosocial approach. So the disease model of addiction is a medical model that's purely about what happens in the brain. And we know some of that is powerful, absolutely, but we also know it's about our emotions, and it's about our thinking, and it's about our social constructs around us. And actually, as long as you don't put yourself in a cage, as long as you are leading a meaningful life with people you love, then recovery is possible. And that's a biopsychosocial approach.
And you said that group work is part of what you do with the Laurel Centre, and I guess that's kind of partly what you're speaking to here now. I mean, it somehow feels a bit, maybe for people again watching, listening, counterintuitive, that this thing that often is kept quite secret and in the shadows, this issue that someone has, to then it's hard enough asking for help, and now I'm kind of doing it with a bunch of other people as well. I might talk one-to-one with a therapist, but really? I mean, but you fundamentally believe that group work is a key part of what can actually help people longer term.
Absolutely. And we've got the evidence to show it. So I'm a bit of a nerd when it comes to research, so we've got lots of outcome measures that demonstrate the efficacy of group work at the Laurel Centre. It just breaks through the isolation. It gives long-term support, long-term accountability as well, and just knowing you are not the only one, just knowing and being with other people who felt what you felt, and just not being alone, just breaking through the secrecy and shame is so important, and having people that really get it and have really got your back. So that community element, there is a very small group work program, so you run, it's a maximum of 8 people in a group with a therapist, so it's therapy led as well, therapeutic. But we see changes in those groups that, frankly, years of therapy can't.
Yeah, I was going to ask, so do you think it's accelerated the change when it's in a group to when you're working individually with someone?
It massively accelerates it. Particularly our residential, because with our 6-day residential, you can't get away, basically. You're trapped.
It is a cage.
It is a cage, but with others. It's a nice cage. Being able to really fully immerse yourself. The problem with most therapy is it's an hour a week, and then you crack on with your normal life, and up until 5 minutes you were on your phone, you were doing whatever, and actually getting away from all distractions and just having those 6 dedicated days. We've had people saying they've made more progress in 6 days than 6 years of therapy, and that literally was a quote from one of the guys.
So you've seen hundreds, thousands of lives changed, and not just people stopping, but people actually getting to this place of being recovered and recovery. And what are some of the stories that you can share? Obviously, you're not going to name names or anything, but some of the stories that have stood out from you over the 15 years or so that you've been working with people of those sort of changes.
One comes instantly to mind, actually, and these were 2 guys that did the our recovery course, the residential course, a few years ago. So they met on the course. They hadn't met each other before that. They met on the course, and they were similar-ish age. One of them had a girlfriend, but it was seriously at breaking point because of his behaviours, and the other one was single at the time. And again, similar story, kept getting into relationships, but they kept coming to an end because basically he'd rather go back to porn. And they became really good friends. And I met one of them on public transport, let's say, that not that long ago, and how are you doing, how's life, sort of stuff. I should say he came and sat next to me. I didn't just hunt him down and tell me how you're feeling. He came and sat next to me, and he's still in touch with the other guy, and this is 7-8 years on. They were both at each other's weddings. They are godfathers to each other's children. They are great mates, and they are both 100% in recovery, cracking on with life. One of them, he had to change his job. He had a kind of job that gave him way too much opportunity. And actually part of him getting into recovery was about changing his job. There's a bit of a cheesy saying, it's lots of cheesy sayings in addiction, but it's not about changing your behaviours, it's about changing your life. And that really is what recovery is about. So he needs to change his job. But he's absolutely loving that job and getting massive dopamine hits from doing that. But yeah, we have lots and lots of success stories of people. And I think it's for people in early recovery, the thought of never ever looking at porn again feels really, really difficult. But actually being able to know that there are so many stories of people out there where actually life is so much better, so much better, and actually just becomes a non-thing. Another cheesy saying, recovery is about what you take up, not what you give up. And I think often people in the early stage, all of their thoughts is in loss and what I'm going to lose. And there's an element of that for sure. And I think, I don't think it does anybody any help to say, oh, don't worry, you won't miss it, because you will at first. But if you can get through that pain barrier, yeah.
I'd love to ask you a little bit about your work with partners, spouses. That's part of what you do as well. And I know you've written a book on that, and Pivotal are going to have some partner stuff coming up as well. Highlight, I guess, what partners should know about their recovery journey, because it's going to be a different journey, but there is recovery needed for partners as well.
I mean, that's where two big distinctions, I guess, between sex and porn addiction and the other addictions. One is it's not about abstinence, it's about healthy sexuality. So it's about changing your relationship to sexuality, not giving it up. Not that you could anyway, but the other is the impact on partners. For partners, not only have you got the pain and the confusion and the challenge of living with someone in recovery, and it certainly can be, but also it's the betrayal. There's a sense of betrayal, huge sense of betrayal. How much partners are impacted really will depend on what happened over how long a period of time, how aware or unaware they were. For some partners, it is traumatising, and that's not too big a word. It is traumatising. For other partners, it's the end of the line. That's it. I'm out of here. Goodbye, gone. And that's absolutely fine. For other partners, it's difficult and challenging and hard work. But it's not necessarily devastating for all partners. That would be a misunderstanding. But I think for partners, it is about making a decision about whether or not they do want to stay in the relationship, what that would mean for them. But before they can make that decision, being able to build trust in the relationship, that their partner really is in recovery and really genuinely wants recovery, and being able to deal with the impact it's had on them, the traumatic impact that it's had on them, rebuilding self-esteem, rebuilding their sense of self-confidence, and often for many partners rebuilding their trust in themselves, because this is often somebody that you thought you knew better than anyone else in the world, somebody who was your rock, who was your go-to, has hurt you in what feels like the worst possible way. And if you didn't even know that was happening, you can't even trust yourself, let alone trust them. So rebuilding trust in yourself is also really important. So for Pivotal, we're just doing a pilot study for Pivotal for partners, and there's the book for partners, and we do support groups for partners as well. Because like the person with the addiction, partners need to meet other partners and just know that they're not alone in this. And also working with couples, so helping couples to rebuild trust. But it's very hard for couples to rebuild trust until each of them has done their individual work, and how they do that and how they talk about that and how they communicate about that is also part of the kind of trust building process.
As you know, we do similar things, and would you say there are any kind of common emotional responses for partners that often maybe if an individual listening is feeling, may feel like, is this just me? Is there something wrong with me that I feel like this? And even just to hear you say some of these things will be releasing them to, oh, hang on, maybe it's not me.
Shock, disbelief, Your shock, confusion, disbelief, sadness, rage, really common, rage. How can you do this to me? They're all trauma responses.
Yeah.
Very, very common trauma responses. For some partners, I think one of the biggest challenges for partners is really, really accepting what's known as the 3 C's. I don't know if you work with the 3 C's in this. You did not cause this. You did not cause this addiction at all. Even if you were the worst partner on the planet, they should have left, not developed this. You did not cause this. No way. You can't control it. No amount of monitoring is going to control this. No amounts of threats, of tears, of ultimatums can control it. It has to be their decision to do recovery, and you can't cure it. If you became perfect overnight, if you're not perfect already, if you became perfect overnight, it would not be enough to cure it. And really accepting those 3 C's, you didn't cause it, you can't control it, and you can't cure it, is hard for partners, because partners, it means accepting their own powerlessness, that this really had nothing to do with me. And on the one hand, that's a relief and a blessing. This had nothing to do with me. But that means I can't make it stop. It's not quite such a relief. That's also scary. So it's a real journey for partners. And that's why they need support as well.
So Paula, as we begin to wrap up, I guess I've got some slightly kind of bigger picture questions around, I guess, society, because that's a massive part of this. So we've talked a lot about individuals and their own struggles and hopefully their hope and freedom. It feels like stigma, even in a culture that has porn's become more acceptable, stigma still seems to be a bit of a major barrier for people to find help. So what do you think are some of the practical steps that society can take that are going to maybe shift public attitudes towards addiction and porn addiction in particular?
I think that's the other issue that many people have with the word addiction, is that addiction is often laden with shame.
Yeah.
People, and if you talk about an alcoholic, if you think about an alcoholic, many people still, the image is going to go to that homeless person on a park bench. If you're an alcoholic and actually you are running a business, you could be running a church, you could be doing anything, you're a woman with small children, then it's really quite different. We still have there's still a huge amount of stigma around addiction, which personally I believe as a society we have got to continue to fight, because addiction is a very, very real problem in our society, and we need to be challenging that stigma whenever we can. When you add porn or sex, you've got all the morality that comes with whenever we talk about sex and porn. So it feels even worse. So I think there's a lot as a society to do with education, to do with learning to not shame people with addiction and recognising addiction as a mental health problem. As we don't shame people with depression, we don't shame people with anxiety. Why we're still shaming people with addiction, I don't know. So I mean, we've really got to sort of take that on board. So certainly education, non-shaming, and the bit I was saying earlier, I think about really understanding that this is a major problem that can affect anybody.
Yeah, I know you contributed to Baroness Burton's porn review. What do you think is the future of kind of public policy, that kind of legislational side of things? And is there some hope you've got or some goals you've got around that side of things that might shape how society views this?
Yeah, I'm going to use alcohol as an example again. Nobody doubts that as a society, alcohol can cause significant problems. It contributes to domestic violence. It contributes to other forms of violence. It causes significant physical health problems, significant mental health problems as well. But nonetheless, don't know about you, but I'm having a drink at the weekend. Don't drink midweek, but I shall certainly be having a drink at the weekend. it doesn't stop the majority of us having a drink, even though we acknowledge the problems that alcohol has on society. And we need to get to the same kind of place with pornography, and to recognise many people may use this recreationally and not have a problem, and maybe a bit too much at times. And actually that's freedom of choice, that's okay. But we need education around it. We need services to support those people that are affected. We need, like we do with alcohol, age restrictions. We need to protect the people that are particularly vulnerable. And we need the porn industry to take some responsibility, in the distributors, as we expect with alcohol. Alcohol is clearly marked for over 18. In theory, you can only buy it in certain places. There's lots of differences between Scotland and here on that, but we have a certain price point. There are all various things that go on. We have alcohol aware campaigns. We need to get to the same place. It's not about banning pornography. It's not about policing what consenting adults choose to do with their time, but we need to have policies.
So do you think there's a step then in the way that, as you say, there's an awareness around alcohol or gambling that you've mentioned before, that this is a public health thing that therefore needs like a gamble aware, for example. Is that a goal for pornography, to kind of have, not porn aware, but that level of, this is public health issue, it affects society in certain ways, and therefore we need to see some change around that?
Yeah, absolutely. This is a public health issue. And again, it's not saying that all porn therefore needs to be banned, because I do believe in choice. But we need to see the potential risks, be aware of those risks, and take them seriously. And what seems to be happening at the moment in the public discourse is that either we are in complete denial of any risk. So no, we have to be sex positive, we have to be open to everything, and everything has to be okay. We're either in complete denial about risk, or we're only seeing risk in one or two areas. For example, the impact of child sexual abuse material, so pornography. It's not porn, but pornography that's representing people under the age, children under the age of 18, or the impact it has in terms of violence against women and girls. Now, those risks are very, very real. So please don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that we shouldn't be looking at them, but they're only part of the story. We need to broaden the story. One of the things that was suggested at a House of Lords round table that I sat on was that in order for the government to kind of wake up and take this seriously, we need to look at how much it costs. How much is it costing the government? Now, that figure is not available, but what I did do was I looked at how much the gambling harms figure was. So when they did the white paper or green paper on gambling harms, there was a figure on that which was in the billions of how much it cost the economy for gambling addiction. Now, problematic gambling is thought to affect 3.1% of the UK population. CSBD, compulsive pornography use, is thought to affect, or sexual behaviour disorder, is thought to affect 4.6% of the UK population. So if you just do a very basic mathematical equation on 3.1% of that problem costs, 4.6% costs, you get a very high figure.
Yeah.
That's not scientific enough for me to put forward to government.
Sure.
However, but that is another piece of research that we need to do, is how much is this problem costing in terms of support for other mental health problems that are often associated with this, the impact on young people, divorce and separation, mental health, physical health. We've got to look at it.
So a question we've sort of asked everyone in these conversations is, where would you like society to be on this issue in, say, 10 or 20 years' time? What would you like that to look like?
10 or 20 years' time. It has changed considerably in the last 10 years. And so that, it's worse, but it's more recognised. Where would I like it to be in 10 years' time? In 10 years' time, I would like us to have made a decision about whether it's an addiction or not and move on from that discussion, because it's boring me to death and I think it is a massive distraction from getting support and help. So I would like us to have made a decision about that so we could move on from that. I would like to see pornography talked about in schools as part of basic education system. We talk about the risks of other types of behaviour. We need to start talking about pornography. It needs to be there. All mental health providers to ask as a standard intake question, how much porn do you use? How many units of alcohol? Do you take any nicotine products? How much porn do you use? Absolute standard intake question. I think pornography is here for good. For good, forever. Yeah, I think it will always be here. I think we need to accept that, but it means we need to start measuring it, talking about it, more research, and absolutely services on the NHS.
Great. Paula, thank you for not just your time today, but everything you've done over the last 10 plus years to make a difference in this area. I really appreciate you. Thanks.
Thank you.